Guten Morgen, guten Tag, guten Abend. So today we have our review of everything that has to do with verbs. So we're going to go over all the verb tenses and hopefully refresh your memory on anything having to do with verbs so you can pinpoint what you may need to review in more detail if any of this seems too fuzzy. Okay, so Verben im Präsens, verbs in the present tense. This is how we conjugate verbs in the present tense. Wo wohnst du is, of course, where do you live? Wo wohnst du? Ich wohne in Anaheim, Kalifornien. Ich wohne, right? Wo wohnt Angela Merkel? Angela Merkel would be replaced with sie, right? She, where does she live? Where does Angela Merkel live? Wo wohnt sie? Sie wohnt in Berlin. So we can replace that with she. Sie wohnt in Berlin. Angela Merkel wohnt in Berlin, etc. So, ich wohne, du wohnst, er, sie, es wohnt, wir wohnen, ihr wohnt, sie wohnen. So it's important to memorize these because they will help you decide. You'll be able to recognize it being in the present tense for one thing. And then, of course, you will need to know whether it's going to be sie wohnt for she lives versus sie wohnen for they live or you formal live. Okay. Spielen is another regular verb. It's totally regular. So, ich spiele, du spielst, er, sie, es spielt, wir spielen, ihr spielt, sie spielen, sie spielen. You see, we have the same totally regular endings for the present tense on this. Gehen is also totally regular. Ich gehe, du gehst, er, sie, es geht, wir gehen, ihr geht, sie gehen. So, English has a present tense and also a present progressive. So this is a note on how to translate the present tense in German. So in English you could say I go or I am going. And in German we do not have a progressive tense. This I am going doesn't have a parallel form. It's just the regular present tense in German. So whenever you would use the progressive in English, like I am going, you just use the regular present tense in German. So the present and the present can also indicate the near future. So when you have I go, I am going to go, and I will go, all of those can be translated as ich gehe. So when you see ich gehe, depending on the context you're going, it could be I go, or it could be I'm going, or I'm going to go or will go in the near future. So ich gehe can mean all of those things depending on context. So these are the regular verb endings in the present. Ich sage, du sagst, er, sie, es sagt, wir sagen, ihr sagt, sie sagen. And then antworten has ever so slight irregularity. So ich antworte, du antwortest, and er, sie, es antwortet. Because the stem ends in a T, we're going to add an EST or an ET instead of just the T or the ST so that we can actually hear that ending. So antworten is just one example of that. Whenever the verb stem ends in D, T, or a consonant cluster like G, N, or F, N, then you add an extra E before the ending of du, ihr, and er, sie, es. So, ich finde, du findest, er, sie, es findet, wir finden, ihr findet, sie finden, same thing. So any of those, arbeiten, antworten, regnen, öffnen, those would all have that same thing, where it's basically regular endings except for you've got that extra E in a few of the cases. Okay, so we'll do finden again. So, ich finde, du findest, er, sie, es findet, wir finden, ihr findet, sie finden. Antworten. Ich antworte, du antwortest, er, sie, es antwortet. Wir antworten. Ihr antwortet, sie antworten und sie antworten. Öffnen, same thing. So ich öffne, du öffnest, er, sie, es öffnet, wir öffnen, ihr öffnet, sie öffnen, sie öffnen. And then if the stem ends in an S sound like S, set, or set, then the do form only adds the T, not the ST, because you might end up with like 3 S's or something. So you end up with like, ich heiße, that's normal, right? Heißen, that's the stem heiß. But then it's du heißt, and normally we would add an ST, but it's just the T. Because it's already, the S set is 2 S's already, we don't need another S. Er, sie, es heißt, wir heißen, ihr heißt, sie heißen, sie heißen. Okay, same thing with reisen, tanzen und so weiter, any of those. Yeah. Reisen. Ich reise, du reist. Er, sie, es reist. Wir reisen, ihr reist, sie reisen, sie reisen. Tanzen does the same thing. Ich tanze, du tanzt. See how you just add the T, not the ST? Er, sie, es tanzt. Wir tanzen, ihr tanzt. Sie tanzen, sie tanzen. Haben, now this is irregular, so this is just going to be one to memorize, right? So, ich habe, du hast, er, sie, es hat. Wir haben, ihr habt. Sie haben, sie haben. Sein is also irregular. Most languages have an irregular to be conjugation. Ich bin, du bist. Er, sie, es ist. Wir sind. Ihr seid. Sie sind. Sie sind. Okay, so both of the sein and haben are very important to commit to memory because they are used to build other verb tenses, which we will go over very soon, all the other verb tenses. Okay, so let's look at the verb conjugations. Ich bin Professor. So I am a professor. Ich bin Professor. Ich bin 60 Jahre alt. I am 60 years old. Ich bin gesund. I am healthy. Du bist Studentin. You are, du bist, right? Du bist 21 Jahre alt. Du bist jung und gesund. Yeah, du bist. So, now we need to remember these stem vowel changing verbs in the present tense. So some verbs in the present tense get a vowel change when you conjugate them. For example, schlafen does this. So we say Herr Wagner schläft, which means Herr Wagner, Mr. Wagner, sleeps or is sleeping. So schlafen, schlafen has a sound in the infinitive, but some of the conjugations have an sound. So ich schlafe, that's the normal vowel, but then du schläfst, er, sie, es schläft. So the du and the er, sie, es have this vowel change. Wir schlafen, ihr schlaft, sie schlafen, sie schlafen. All the others are normal. It's just the du and the er, sie, es. So it's important to recognize these vowel changes because sometimes they can make the verb look very different than before. This one is not too different. The a to the e, it doesn't make it look unrecognizable. Some of the others make them look kind of unrecognizable. So fahren, to drive. Jens fährt Motorrad, to drive or to ride. So Jens is riding a motorcycle. Jens fährt Motorrad. So that one takes the same pattern, a to the e. And then tragen is also that same pattern. Sophie trägt Hosen, so tragen, but then trägt, same pattern. Laufen takes the umlaut and it changes the sound to oi. So Matthias läuft im Wald. Laufen, läuft. So there's, you add the umlaut for that one. And then essen changes that e to an I. So ist, essen becomes ist. Ernst isst Eis. And then lesen, that e changes into an IE. So Hans liest ein Buch. So that looks very different. Lesen, liest. That might be confusing if you don't remember that has the vowel change in it. So of course, in the back of your dictionary, it will, when it says third person singular present tense, it will list any vowel changes. Sehen is similar to lesen, sehen. They both have the IE vowel change. Natalie sieht fern. Yeah. And so here's the summary. Essen becomes, it takes the E to the I. So ich esse, du isst. Geben takes that as well. Du gibst, er, sie, es gibt. Nehmen takes a similar one. It also changes that consonant. Du nimmst, er, sie, es nimmt. Sprechen takes it as well. Du sprichst, er, sie, es spricht. Versprechen, so anytime you have, so sprechen means to speak, and then versprechen means to promise, and they're related, right? But anytime you have a prefix on a vowel that otherwise takes a vowel change, like sprechen, it just takes a vowel change, right? So if you put a prefix on the front of it, it's still going to take that vowel change, no matter what prefix you put on front of it. So that's important to know, obviously, because you need to be able to take that prefix off in order to analyze what that verb is. But then the prefix changes the meaning of the verb. So you'll want to look up the verb with the prefix on it in the dictionary to get the meaning. but you want to look it up with the prefix off of it in the back of the dictionary to understand what the vowel change is. Werden, to become, takes a vowel change, plus it has irregular endings as well. And then this pattern is lesen, ich lese, du liest, sie es liest. Sehen becomes ich sehe, but then du siehst, sie es sieht. And then this pattern, backen, becomes du bäckst, you bake. Du bäckst, sie es backt. Fahren, du fährst, sie es fährt. Halten means to hold or to stop. Du hältst, sie es hält. Lassen, very special verb with lots of meanings. We had a whole unit, a whole part of a chapter on the verb lassen. It can be used for a lot of things, and it has a vowel change. Du lässt, sie es lässt. Schlafen becomes du schläfst, sie es schläft. Tragen, du trägst, sie es trägt. Waschen becomes du wäscht, sie es wäscht. And then, of course, laufen, we have this one, and another one was saufen. Saufen means to get drunk. Yeah. Schlafen, here we have schlafen again. Ich schlafe, du schläfst, sie es schläft. Wir schlafen, ihr schlaft. Sie schlafen, sie schlafen. Fahren, ich fahre, du fährst, sie es fährt. Wir fahren, ihr fahrt. Sie fahren, sie fahren. Essen, ich esse, du isst, sie es isst. Wir essen, ihr esst. Sie essen und sie essen. Sprechen, ich spreche, du sprichst, sie es spricht. Wir sprechen, ihr sprecht. Sie sprechen, sie sprechen. Okay, lesen, ich lese, but then du liest, sie es liest. Wir lesen, ihr lest, sie lesen, sie lesen. Sehr schön. Okay, vergessen, to forget takes a vowel change as well. Ich vergesse, du vergisst, sie es vergisst. Wir vergessen, ihr vergesst, sie vergessen, sie vergessen. Okay, nehmen takes the E to the I, plus that H is going to turn into an M. It's because we have in the version with the infinitive, it's actually a long vowel, nehmen, but then once we change the vowel, it's going to be a short vowel, so that's why you get the H after long vowels, and then you get the double consonant after short vowels. That's why it changes. Ich nehme, du nimmst. So we get both that I and that M. So you can see if you're not used to this, if you don't know that this happens, like nehmen, nimmst, it's quite different. Nehmen, nimmst, you've got a different vowel, and then you've got like the H is gone. So it can be, you might not recognize it as that verb if you don't know that these vowel changes happen, right? So it'd be very hard to look up in the dictionary if you don't know that it actually comes from nehmen. That's why it's important to be familiar with the vowel changes on these verbs. Sie es nimmt. Wir nehmen, ihr nehmt, sie nehmen, sie nehmen. Sehen, ich sehe, du siehst, sie es sieht. Wir sehen, ihr seht, sie sehen, sie sehen. Okay, so then we have this little summary. We have all these we went over just now, irregular forms in the present tense of strong verbs. So it's just present tense verbs, and you can see that the du and the sie es is a handful of verbs that take their stem vowel changes. And then we've got a longer list, and some of these are pretty common, but others you wouldn't use quite as often, but they are important to know. So I encourage you to spend a little time with this list to familiarize yourself with these because they could come up. Okay, and then of course these ones as well. Yeah, there's Zolfen. Laufen, Zolfen. Yeah. Okay, so then we have verbs with separable and inseparable prefixes. So stehen, of course, means to stand. That's easy enough. And then you can have aufstehen, which means to stand up or to get up in the morning. So similar to English, you can have things that look like prepositions and add them to verbs to change the meaning. So you have Herr Wagner steht, which means Mr. Wagner stands, but then Herr Wagner steht auf means Mr. Wagner gets up or stands up. So auf is kind of a preposition, right? But you can add it. It can be part of a verb. And it's a prefix on the verb, and it changes the meaning. So Aufstehen is the infinitive, to stand up, to get up. So when it's the infinitive form, it's all together, aufstehen, it's one thing. But then once you start conjugating it in the present tense, it's going to get removed and put to the end of the sentence. So you end up with ich stehe auf, du stehst auf, sie es steht auf, wir stehen auf, ihr steht auf, sie stehen auf. So you got to conjugate the verb, obviously, and then put that prefix, you take it off and put it to the end of the sentence in the present tense. So aufräumen means to clean up. So you could have Herr Wagner räumt seine Wohnung auf. Mr. Wagner cleans his apartment up. Or in English, you can move that preposition around a little bit. You could say Mr. Wagner cleans up his apartment. In German, you can't do that. You have to put the prefix all the way to the end of the clause. Not at the end of the sentence a lot of times, but the end of the clause if you're going to have a whole nother clause after. Yeah. So aufräumen, that's the infinitive, right? So we have ich räume auf, du räumst auf, sie es räumt auf, wir räumen auf, ihr räumt auf, sie räumen auf. So you see we've taken that prefix off and put it to the end, and then if we had other things like with this one, seine Wohnung we had here, then the auf would come all the way at the end of the clause. Okay, einkaufen means to shop, right? So you could say Herr Wagner kauft ein, which means, so in English there's no prefix, just to shop, right? But in German this one does have a prefix, so they don't always match up one to one. Some have prefixes and some don't in each language, right? So also, this idea is sometimes expressed with a double infinitive. Einkaufen gehen, to go shopping. So you can say, Herr Wagner geht einkaufen, which is Mr. Wagner goes shopping. And you can, so here we're conjugating gehen, and then the other verb is still the infinitive. And you can do this with a lot of different verbs. You can say, geht einkaufen, geht joggen, geht wandern, geht schwimmen, all that stuff. Okay. So einkaufen is the infinitive. You say ich kaufe ein, du kaufst ein, etc. That prefix is at the end. And then with the double infinitive version, you would say ich gehe einkaufen, I go shopping, du gehst einkaufen, you go shopping, etc. And then we can try Fernsehen. Fern is the prefix, and then sehen is the verb. So technically it means to see far, but it means to watch TV, right? So Natalie sieht fern means she watches TV. See how that fern has been removed and is put to the end. So Natalie sieht heute Abend fern. So you see that fern is way at the end of the clause. Yeah. Okay. So Fernsehen is the infinitive, and then when you conjugate, of course, sehen is it changes its stem vowel. So we were just going over all those. So there's two tricks to this verb. One is that it's got a prefix that has to be removed to put to the end, and the other is that it's got a stem vowel change that has to be done in the du and the sie es forms. Du siehst fern, sie es sieht fern. Okay, so let's try einladen. This also has a vowel change and a prefix. So Jutta lädt ihre Freunde ein, which means Jutta invites her friends. So it has a stem vowel change as well as a separable prefix. So you get, these are the two rules, right? You see the prefix there that I've highlighted, and then the vowel change. So you get ich lade ein, I invite. Du lädst ein, you invite. Sie es lädt ein, he, she, it invites, etc. But then wir laden ein, ihr ladt ein. Those don't take the vowel change. Yeah. Okay. So we have some examples of separable prefix verbs. Ausgehen, to go out. Weggehen, to go away. Zurückkommen, to come back. Heimkommen, to come home. Anprobieren, to try on. Ausprobieren, to try out. Aufräumen, to clean up. Aufstehen, to stand up or get up. So these ones on this list are very parallel to their English versions, right? Aus means out, and then gehen means go, so it literally means to go out. So some of these are going to look very much like their English counterparts, and others are not going to line up very well with English, right? So abfahren means to depart, which is to drive off is what it's more parallel to, but it's to depart, right? And then ankommen, to arrive. An means at, so it's like to come at, which, doesn't really, you can see where it comes from, but it's not, the right translation, but you see where where it's kind of related. But ankommen means to arrive. Anfangen means to start, begin. Aufhören, to stop or to end. So this one, for example, is very misleading if you try to make it match up with English, because hören means to listen, or to hören means to hear, and auf means up. So to hear up, that has nothing to do with stopping. That is like totally different, right? So aufhören means to stop. It has nothing to do with hearing, right? Anhören, by contrast, anhören means to listen to. So just hören by itself means to hear, but then anhören with the prefix means to listen to, and it's very similar, right? Anrufen means to call on the phone, to call up, you could say. Einladen means to invite, and then einschlafen means to fall asleep. Schlafen by itself means to sleep. Einschlafen means to fall asleep, so it's related. Aufpassen, to pay attention. Aufwachen, to wake up. Einsteigen, to get in a vehicle, to board. Aussteigen, to get off a vehicle. Umsteigen, to change vehicles. Literally, it means to climb in the vehicle, climb out of the vehicle, climb around the vehicles. Gesteigen means to climb, right? Fernsehen, to watch TV. Mitkommen, to come with, come along. Vorhaben, to plan. I had it before myself, yeah. Okay, so then just to remember the word order of several prefix verbs, of course, we got that prefix at the end. When we're conjugating in the present tense, we want that prefix at the end of the sentence. Ich komme 10 Uhr in Berlin an. I arrive at 10 o'clock in Berlin. Ruft Sie morgen an. He's calling you tomorrow. Ruft Sie morgen an. Wir hören 1 Uhr auf. We are stopping at 1 o'clock. Wir räumen den Seminarraum auf. We clean up the seminar room. Sie steht 6 Uhr auf. She gets up at 6. Wir füllen das Formular aus. We fill out the form, or we fill the form out. Gehst du heute Abend aus? Are you going out tonight? Ich kaufe am Morgen ein. I shop in the morning. Or I'm going to shop in the morning, maybe. Ich packe meine Schuhe ein. I pack my shoes into the suitcase. Wir sehen nicht so oft fern. We don't watch TV very often. Okay, so that was all present tense. Now we need to get back to our simple past tense. It's called the Präteritum in German. It's also called the imperfect in German. So either Präteritum or imperfect in German, and then simple past in English. So here we have the simple past of sein. So, wo warst du gestern Abend? Where were you last night? Wo warst du? Ich war zu Hause. Wo warst du gestern Abend? I was at home. Where were you last night? Ich war auch zu Hause. I was also at home. Yeah. Okay, so it goes. Ich war, du warst, er, sie, es war, wir waren, ihr wart, sie waren, sie waren. So you can see the simple past. These are the endings you're going to have on the irregular simple past verb. The regulars have a different set of endings, but the irregular simple past verbs have these endings. And then we can do more with sein. So, Helmut Kohl war Bundeskanzler von 1982 bis 1998. He was. Er war Christdemokrat. That was his political party. So, Helmut Schmidt und Gerhard Schröder waren auch Bundeskanzler. So they were. See, we've got that ending waren. Not just war, but waren, because it's like they were, right? Sie waren Sozialdemokraten. Yeah. Okay. Das Buch von Günter Grass war lang. The book by Günter Grass was long. He has many long books, but we're just talking about one specific long book. And then maybe it was Die Blechtrommel, the tin drum, very long. Die Bücher von Thomas Mann waren sehr lang. So now we're going to do a version with the plural, and you see how it's waren instead of just war. Yeah. So maybe if you've read Der Zauberberg, you would know the Magic Mountain. It's like over 1,000 pages. It's the famous, the longest thing that you have to have read to get your PhD in German studies. Okay, so then we have haben. So the simple past, Hattest du Spaß in Berlin? Did you have fun in Berlin? Had you fun in Berlin? Hattest du, had you, did you have? Ja, ich hatte viel Spaß. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Ich hatte viel Spaß. Ich hatte viel Zeit, einen ganzen Monat. I had a lot of time. Ich hatte viel Zeit. Okay, so here we have haben in the simple past. It's irregular. Ich hatte. Du hattest. Er, sie, es hatte. Wir hatten. Ihr hattet. Sie hatten. Sie hatten. So it's got some endings, but they're irregular. And then here are the regular ones. So when they say weak verbs, that means regular verbs. They're weak because they follow the rules. They're followers. So they're weak, you could say. Weak means regular. So spielen is regular, and these are going to be your endings on the regular ones. Ich spielte, du spieltest, er, sie, spielte, wir spielten, ihr spieltet, sie spielten. So that te ending is going to be characteristic of the regular simple past. And then antwortete, du antwortetest, you've got the extra e in there. But you see it's got the te for all of those. And then hatte also has the te. But then with war, du warst, the irregular ones have the other endings. So this is regular. Reisen is regular. Ich reiste, du reistest, er, sie, es reiste. Wir reisten, ihr reistet, sie reisten, sie reisten. So that's the te ending you're going to see on the regular simple past verbs. And then lernen is also regular. So ich lernte, du lerntest, er, sie, es lernte, wir lernten, ihr lerntet, sie lernten, sie lernten. Spielen is regular. So ich spielte, du spieltest, er, sie, es spielte, wir spielten, ihr spieltet, sie spielten, sie spielten. Arbeiten is slightly irregular just because we have that stem that ends in a T, so we need the extra E before we add the endings. So ich arbeitete, du arbeitetest, er, sie, es arbeitete, wir arbeiteten, ihr arbeitetet, sie arbeiteten, und sie arbeiteten. I know it sounds like I'm making it up, but that's really how it is. That's really how that verb is conjugated. Okay, reden is also weird sounding, but not quite as bad as arbeiten. So, ich redete, it's because that stem ends in a D and not a T, so it doesn't sound quite as repetitive, but it still sounds pretty weird. So, du redetest, er, sie, es redete, wir redeten, ihr redetet, sie redeten, sie redeten. Okay, so simple past of strong verbs, it just shows you the weak on the left side as in regular. So you can compare the te endings on the regular simple past verbs versus the very different endings on the irregular ones. Like kam, see there's like no ending, it's a naked ending on that. Ich and er, sie, es have a naked ending. And then du kamst, and then the wir kamen, ihr kamt, sie kamen, those ones do have endings. So they've just got different sets of endings. It's important to note. And then let's try sehen, irregular. So ich sah, du sahst, er, sie, es sah, wir sahen, ihr saht, sie sahen, sie sahen. So you see the ich and the er, sie, es have no ending. And then the du and all the others, they have a little bit of an ending there. But the important thing, of course, is to note that these irregular ones have all sorts of vowel changes going on, right? Za, we got a totally different vowel. Gehen, it's got a very strange vowel change going on. Ich ging, du gingst, er, sie, es ging, wir gingen, ihr gingt, sie gingen, sie gingen. Yeah. So it's that vowel change that makes them irregular, and of course the different endings. But it's really the vowel change that we're surprised by, right? Yeah. Okay, essen becomes ich aß, du aßt, er, sie, es aß, wir aßen, ihr aßt, sie aßen, sie aßen. This is similar to English. Eat, to eat, right? And then I ate, we get the same vowel change in English. Eat, ate, it changes to an A-T-E, right? Aß, yeah. Okay, geben, ich gab, du gabst, er, sie, es gab, wir gaben, ihr gabt, ihr gabt, sie gaben, sie gaben. And then so we can look, for example, if you had a sentence in the present, ich reise nach Bern, become ich reiste nach Bern. That's the simple past. Ich reiste nach Bern. If you want to say es ist wie ein Märchen, you would change that into es war wie ein Märchen. Ich sehe viele Banken. In the present would be ich sah viele Banken. Wir haben eine Konferenz. In the present tense would be wir hatten eine Konferenz. And then wir sehen schöne Brücken would be wir sahen schöne Brücken. And so the thing is, see how the difference between ich sah, see there's no ending there, but then wir sahen, because it's a different, ich, and then wir, singular, plural, so it has different endings. Es gibt einen Bärengraben, we want to say es gab einen Bärengraben. Es gibt einen Mann, der Kinder isst. There is a man who eats children. We want to say there was a man who ate children. Es gab einen Mann, der Kinder aß. It's a sculpture of a man eating children. And then ich übernachte in einem Hotel becomes then ich übernachtete in einem Hotel. Okay, so then we had, for example, this exercise to find the verbs in Schneewittchen. You can say, es war einmal mitten im Winter und die Schneeflocken fielen wie Federn vom Himmel. Da saß eine schöne Königin an einem Fenster, das hatte einen Rahmen von schwarzem Ebenholz und nähte. So those are the verbs. And then, so the trick is to recognize the infinitives from which the verbs come, right? Because if you don't know what nähte is easy enough because it's regular. So you can just take off that te and add the en. You get back to the infinitive nähen, to sew. But for the irregular ones, you have to be able to recognize them enough to be able to look them up in the back of the dictionary. Because you won't be able to find, they won't be listed in their past tense form in the dictionary. They're only listed as the infinitives in the dictionary. So you have to be able to take them back to the infinitive in order to look up their meanings. Okay, so those are all the infinitives for that. And then we have some irregular weak verbs. This is another set of verbs in the simple past, and they're called mixed verbs sometimes because they're kind of irregular and kind of regular. They have vowel changes like the irregular ones, but they have the endings of the regular ones. So you have like bringen, ich brachte, I brought, ich brachte. So you do have that vowel change, and you have a consonant change as well. So you've got like these internal changes in the verb. The vowel change you would expect from an irregular verb, but then the ending is the te, like a regular verb. So, ich brachte, ich dachte, ich brannte, ich kannte, ich nannte, ich rannte, ich wusste. So those are pretty common verbs, and just make sure you're familiar with those simple past forms. So denken is the example of this, ich dachte. So it sounds similar to the way it changes in English. Think, to think, denken, and then ich dachte. I thought. Ich dachte. Du dachtest, er, sie, es dachte. Wir dachten, ihr dachtet, sie dachten, sie dachten. Bringen, similar pattern. Ich brachte, I brought. To bring, bringen, I brought. Ich brachte. Those vowels change in a very similar way. Ich brachte, du brachtest, er, sie, es brachte. Wir brachten, ihr brachtet, sie brachten, sie brachten. Sehr schön. Kennen, ich kannte. Kennen means to know or be familiar with. Ich kannte. Du kanntest. Er, sie, es kannte. Wir kannten, ihr kanntet, sie kannten, sie kannten. So you see, those are all the same endings you would get on a regular, like ich machte or something. Ich spielte, du spieltest. So all those endings are regular, but then that vowel change is not regular. Wissen is ich wusste, du wusstest. Er, sie, es wusste. Wir wussten. Ihr wusstet, sie wussten, sie wussten. So, and then werden is its own beast, and it just shows you the present and the simple past of werden, which is worth committing to memory because werden is used to build other verb tenses, mostly the future and the passive. So it's important to know what werden looks like in all of its different forms. So here's the present tense of werden. Ich werde, du wirst, er, sie, es wird, wir werden, ihr werdet, sie werden. And then simple past, Ich wurde, du wurdest, er, sie, es wurde, wir wurden, ihr wurdet, sie wurden, and then this, ich war, du warst, this wart right here is actually an obsolete form. So ich wart, you'd have to go earlier than the beginning of the 20th century to see wart. Say, I would say about 1850s, between 1850 and 1900 is when wart died out. So you need to be able to recognize wart for sure in texts that are older, wart. But if you said that in real life, people would think you sounded very old. Yeah. So wurde is the form you need today. Okay. Werden in the simple past. Ich wurde, or maybe ich ward, if you're talking to someone from the 19th century. And then du wurdest. Er, sie, es wurde. Wir wurden, ihr wurdet, sie wurden, sie wurden. And then now, that was a simple past. Now we're going to get to the perfect, which is the conversational past tense, aka present perfect. It's called present perfect, but it's a misleading name because it's not the present at all. It's the past. We're talking about the past. So I don't usually call it the present perfect. I usually call it the perfect or the conversational past tense because I think that makes it more clear what that means. So let's look at the irregular verb in the perfect, which is spielen. Ich habe gespielt. Du hast gespielt. Er, sie, es hat gespielt. Wir haben gespielt. Ihr habt gespielt. Sie haben gespielt. Sie haben gespielt. That's how you say I played, you played, or maybe I have played, you have played, etc. So how do we do that with machen, right? You would use the exact same pattern. And you would say, ich habe gemacht, du hast gemacht, er, sie, es hat gemacht, all that same thing. Lernen would be the same. Ich habe gelernt, du hast gelernt, er, sie, es hat gelernt. Leben, ich habe geliebt, du hast geliebt. Sagen, ich habe gesagt, du hast gesagt, er, sie, es hat gesagt. Diskutieren would be, ich habe diskutiert, du hast diskutiert, er, sie, es hat diskutiert, etc. So we have to make past participles. The perfect is made with haben or sein plus a past participle. There are three general types of past participles. Regular, gemacht, gekocht, gespielt, regular formation. Or irregular formation. Gegessen, getrunken, getan, geholfen, gewonnen, geschwommen, gesungen, irregular. Or maybe mixed, gedacht, gebracht, gewusst, gekannt. So we'll go over how these are all formed again. Irregular past participles are formed with the GE plus the verb stem, and they're usually a vowel and or consonant change, plus the EN. So GE and verb change, or GE and vowel change and EN. That's irregular formation. For example, finden becomes gefunden. So we add the GE and there's a vowel change and the EN, gefunden. Singen becomes gesungen, schreiben becomes geschrieben, very subtle vowel change here. Schreiben, geschrieben, the EI becomes an IE. And then bleiben has the same pattern, bleiben, geblieben, trinken, getrunken. So because these forms are irregular, you will find them listed in tables and dictionaries. The back of the dictionary has all of these forms. And you will notice that some irregular verbs form the participles in ways that sound similar to English, using patterns of vowel and consonant changes. So finden, gefunden, find, found. Singen, gesungen, sing, sung. Trinken, getrunken, drink, drunk. Yeah, you can hear the similarities. So here we have regular, irregular, and mixed. So let's look at the mixed ones. They have they've got their stem vowel or consonant changes like the irregular, but they take the T suffix like the regular. So the regular is GE plus stem plus T. GE plus stem plus T. GE plus stem plus T. That's regular. And then the mixed is GE plus stem plus T, but the stem has a vowel change in it. So GE plus verb stem, vowel consonant change, and then the T. And this is different from the irregulars because they have the EN at the end instead of the T. So, bringen becomes gebracht, kennen becomes gekannt, wissen, gewusst, denken, gedacht. So they are also included. They're basically irregular. They're just not quite as irregular as the others. Okay, so ich habe gekocht. You need to know whether to use haben or sein, because sometimes it's haben and sometimes it's sein, right? Ich habe gekocht. That's with haben. Ich bin gekommen is with sein, to be. Ich bin, I am, right? So ich bin gekommen uses sein and not haben. The default is haben. Most verbs use haben. So if you don't know for certain, it's probably haben, but if you look at like a list of verbs, most verbs use haben, but so there aren't as many verbs that use sein, but those verbs that do use sein are very common verbs, so they do show up a lot. So we can look at some examples. On the left we have ich habe gegessen, ich habe gekocht, ich habe getrunken, ich habe gelernt, ich habe gespielt, ich habe gefrühstückt, ich habe gelesen. So these are these verbs mean all sorts of things, all different actions that were done in the past. But then ich bin gegangen, ich bin gekommen, ich bin geflogen, ich bin gefahren, ich bin gelaufen, ich bin geschwommen, ich bin aufgestanden. So all of these verbs have to do with movement, traveling, changing location. So typically the verbs that use sein have to do with moving around. And then other notable ones are ich bin geboren and ich bin gestorben. To be born and to die also use it. And then ich bin geworden, I have become. Werden also uses sein. And then the verb sein itself also uses sein as its helping verb. So ich bin gewesen, I have been. Ich bin gewesen. Yeah. So ich bin, it's important, you have to be able to conjugate sein in the present tense to do this, right? Here we have ich bin, but it could be du bist, er, sie, es ist. So it's like ich habe and ich bin in these examples, but you have to be able to do it for all of the different people. So ich bin, du bist, er, sie, es ist, wir sind, ihr seid, sie sind. And then of haben, of course, ich habe, du hast, er, sie, es hat, wir haben, ihr habt, sie haben. So then let's get back to our participles. We look at the infinitive and then we need to know how to make the participle, right? So machen is going to be regular, gemacht, right? Essen becomes gegessen. It's irregular. For one thing, it's got that consonant change, and another thing, it's got the en at the end. Irregular participle, gegessen, eaten. Fahren, gefahren. It's irregular because it has that en at the end and not the t. It doesn't have a vowel change though. So fangen is gefangen, very similar situation, caught. And then fliegen, geflogen, geben, gegeben, haben, gehabt, kennen, gekannt, kommen, gekommen, reiten, geritten. This one's interesting. Reiten, to ride, as in a horse. And then geritten sounds like ridden. Ride, ridden. Yeah. Reiten only goes for things that you ride on top of, not things that you ride inside of. So nehmen, genommen, schlafen, geschlafen, sein, gewesen, which is have been, right? Ich bin gewesen, I have been. Singen, gesungen, sprechen, gesprochen, very much like English, spoken, gesprochen, gesprochen. Tragen, getragen, treffen, getroffen, werden, geworden. Ich bin geworden, I have become. Okay, so now sometimes you have verbs with prefixes, right? And so you have to know how to make those participles as well. So participles with separable prefix verbs, what you do is you put the ge in between the prefix and the rest of the verb. So you have ich habe meine Freunde eingeladen. The ge goes after the prefix but before the rest of the verb. Or ihr seid 10 Uhr angekommen. Y'all arrived at 10 o'clock. Wir haben den ganzen Tag ferngesehen. We watched TV the whole day. So the ge goes in the middle. The ge goes after that prefix and before everything else. And then the rest of the verb you're going to do, if it has any vowel changes or if it has the en instead of the t, you're still going to do all those things. Hat seine Mutter angerufen. He called up his mother. Du bist 10 Uhr ausgegangen. You went out at 7. Ich habe mein Zimmer aufgeräumt. Yeah, all those separable prefix verbs work the same way. So here we have a list of separable prefixes that are common, and it's important to note those because they will change the meaning of the verb. And yeah, so then here's an example. Er ist fortgegangen und hat ein neues Leben angefangen. He has gone away. He went away or has gone away and then started a new life. Angefangen. Hat angefangen. Okay, so then the inseparable prefixes work a little differently. What happens with these, instead of adding the GE after the prefix, you're just not going to add the GE at all. The inseparable prefix blocks the GE from being added to the participle. So these verbs do not take the participial prefix GE. So once you see any of these inseparable prefixes, they're listed here, you're not going to add any GE. You just ignore it, but you are going to, whatever else would happen to that past participle, you do that. So the ending and the vowel changes are going to happen. So bemerken, empfinden, entstehen, these are all very common ones. So then it gives you some examples, entdecken, entfernen, all of these, right? So it's important to start to memorize those, to recognize the inseparable prefixes, because they end up making these past participles they're not super recognizable as past participles because the GE isn't there. So we can look at these, for example. Ich bin gekommen means I came or I have come. And there's no prefix involved. It's kommen, gekommen. There's no prefix on that verb. We're looking at the participle, gekommen, but there's no prefix. But let's look at a separable prefix version. Ich bin zurückgekommen. So now, with the GE has been added after the separable prefix. And then, with an inseparable prefix, ich habe ein Geschenk bekommen. So see, there is no GE here because this inseparable prefix BE has blocked it from being added. But everything else is the same. Gekommen, see, we still have that EN going on. Yeah. Okay, so the GE blocks the inseparable prefix is not going to be added with the GE is not going to be added whenever you have an inseparable prefix. And then the rest of the verb takes whatever changes it would normally take in its participle form. In some cases, whether you use sein or haben, helping verb will change based on the meaning of the verb changing, right? We had this one, ich habe ein Geschenk bekommen, I received, because bekommen means to receive. And so it's habe bekommen. It's completely different meaning. But then ich bin gekommen means I came, and so ich bin, but ich habe. So this prefix has changed the meaning of the verb sometimes so that you also change whether you use sein or haben. So, for example, ich bin gekommen, I came. Ich habe bekommen, I received. Yeah, so things can change quite radically. And then ankommen, ich bin angekommen, I arrived. Yes. Okay, so we have more examples. Stehen means to stand, right? So ich habe gestanden, which means I stood or I have stood. It's irregular, so it's got a vowel change, a, gestanden, vowel and consonant change. And then it's got the en, gestanden. And let's look at a version that has an inseparable prefix on it. Verstehen, which means to understand. So ich habe verstanden, for one thing, that this inseparable prefix, ver, is going to block the GE from being added. So there's no GE here, it's just still ver. It's not like gefair, right? Just ver. And then we're going to take that same vowel change we had before, and we're going to take the same ending we had before. Ich habe verstanden, I understood or I have understood. Aufstehen, ich bin aufgestanden, I got up, I stood up. And so the thing is, the meaning has changed. Like to stand versus to stand up, now it has more to do with movement. So it's going to be ich bin and not ich habe. So all those changes can happen. And then when you look up a participle of a verb in the verb table, you may need to remove the prefix before you find it there. So mitsingen, for example, you might see mitsingen, right? And you would need to look up singen in the verb table to know what those vowel changes are, right? Singen, gesungen, so mitsingen, mitgesungen. All those, this has a parallel. All the vowel changes are still happening the same way. Bekommen, ankommen, mitkommen all come from common, right? So you look up common in the verb table and it will be used with that prefix in all the same ways. So gekommen, angekommen, mitgekommen, bekommen. They all have that same ending. Ansehen, versehen, fernsehen, they all come originally from sehen. So they are going to have that same vowel, the same, all the same changes that they would with sehen. Gesehen, angesehen, ferngesehen, versehen, all that stuff. Yeah. So we can look at some with prefixes, separable and inseparable. We'll just to refamiliarize ourselves with how they all look when you go from the infinitive to the past participle. Aufstehen, aufgestanden, separable prefix. Ankommen, angekommen. Anfangen, angefangen. Anrufen, angerufen. Fernsehen, ferngesehen. Ausgehen, ausgegangen. All those separable prefix verbs have their GE after the prefix and before the rest of the verb. And if the rest of the verb is irregular, it's going to take all of its irregular changes. And then diskutieren, korrigieren, and reparieren, and probieren, and studieren. Those are all examples of verbs that end in ieren, and they do not take the GE as well. They also block the ieren ending, blocks the GE from being added. So diskutiert, they have the T, but then no prefix. Diskutiert, korrigiert, repariert, probiert, studiert. So it'd be like, ich habe studiert. I have studied, right? And then all of these next ones are going to be the inseparable prefixes. Bekommen, ich habe bekommen. And then besucht, bezahlt, entdeckt, erfunden, vergessen, verstanden. Yes. Okay, so now let's look at the word order on a perfect sentence, right? The conjugated haben or sein takes the normal verb position, second position most of the time, and then the past participle goes to the end of the clause. So you have ich habe gegessen. Habe is the conjugated haben or sein, the helping verb, takes the second position. And then the past participle goes to the end of the clause. Ich habe einen Apfel gegessen, past participle at the end. Ich habe gestern einen Apfel gegessen. Ich habe gestern schnell zu Hause einen Apfel gegessen. So you see, you have time, manner, place. That's the general word order, and then the direct object goes to the end. So when you're translating, both of these things you need that are at the end, you need to grab and put forward. So you want to say I have eaten or I ate. So ich habe, and then you have to grab this past participle and put it forward. I have eaten. And then also, a lot of times you have to take that direct object and move it forward as well. I have eaten an apple at home. Or I ate an apple at home. Yes. Okay, so now let's get to the super past, the extra past. It's the Plusquamperfekt. So the German name for this is Plusquamperfekt, and it is also called the past perfect, and I like to call it the extra past or the super past because it's the verb tense you use when you have a story in the past tense and you want to talk about something that was even more in the past than the thing you were just mentioning. So, this is a comparison. Ich habe gesprochen means I have spoken or I spoke. That's the normal perfect that we've been doing for the past couple of minutes. Ich habe gesprochen. But then let's compare ich hatte gesprochen. I had spoken. So the difference between I have spoken or I had spoken. Ich habe gesprochen. Ich hatte gesprochen. So the perfect, that first one, it uses haben or sein conjugated in the present tense plus the participle. Ich habe gesprochen. See how habe is actually conjugated in the present tense. It's conjugation. It's a combination of present tense haben plus past participle. That's the perfect, normal past. But then the extra past uses haben or sein conjugated in the simple past plus the participle. Ich hatte is the simple past, right? Ich hatte, I had. So the only difference is the way that haben is conjugated, and then the past participle is the same. So we have the way these are conjugated. So hatte, it just shows some like regular, gesagt is a weak, for these are irregular verbs, right? Gesagt gereist. So sie es hatte gesagt, sie hatten gesagt. They had said. He had traveled. And then if the verb, so, this uses haben, right? Ich habe gesagt. Or ich habe gesprochen. That uses haben. But all those verbs that use sein will use sein as well, right? So, war gekommen, sie waren gekommen. So if it normally it would be ist gekommen in the perfect, but then you just change the way that this is conjugated. Instead of the present tense, ist, it's then the simple past, war. So simple past plus past participle instead of present plus past participle. Okay, so example, we had meine Reise nach Leipzig told in a combination of different past tenses, like you would normally tell a story in, right? So, damals wohnte ich in Berlin. I lived in Berlin. So that's the simple past. Es war Dezember und ich hatte eine Sternenlampe in meiner Wohnung. So these are all simple past. Es war, ich hatte, simple past. So then, meine Freundin Clara und ich sind mit dem Zug nach Leipzig gefahren. So, wir sind gefahren. That's the normal perfect. We have ridden the train. Or we rode the train, either way. Yeah. And then, nachdem wir angekommen waren, after we had arrived, wir waren angekommen. Wir sind gefahren. So that first, after we had arrived, we rode. And so this thing happened more in the past, and then this happened less in the past. Still in the past, but more in the past. Okay. In der Nationalbibliothek haben wir viele interessante Archivmaterialien gefunden. In the National Library, we found, haben gefunden, that's normal past. That's just the perfect. But what if we wanted to say, vor der Reise hatten wir eine Liste von Materialien gemacht, die wir brauchten. We had made, before the trip, we had made a list of materials. So this is something that's even more in the past. We found some things, but before we found them, we had made a list. Yeah, so that's when you need the Plusquamperfekt. Nachdem wir die Nationalbibliothek besichtigt hatten, sind wir zur Uni gegangen. After we had visited the National Library, we went to the university. So hatten, we had visited. Okay, am nächsten Tag sind wir zum Museum für Druckkunst gegangen. So you can tell this is regular past, perfect. Sind gegangen, right? We went. Dort haben wir 4 Druckerpressen gesehen. We saw, we have seen, or we saw many printing presses. Ich hatte noch nie eine Druckerpresse gesehen. I had never seen a printing press before. So this is hatte gesehen, combination of the simple past, hatte, plus the past participle. It's going to be our extra past. Okay, so now let's get to the modal verbs. Hopefully you remember the modal verbs to some degree. They work similar to English in the present tense. So they express the attitude towards another action. You can say, ich kann kochen. Ich muss kochen. Ich soll kochen. Ich will kochen. Ich möchte kochen. Ich darf kochen. All of those modal verbs. Hopefully you remember. Then we have the meanings of the modal verbs. Maybe need to review what the meanings of the modal verbs are. And then they all have a slightly irregular conjugation. So they all have vowel changes. Or most of them have vowel changes. Not sollen. Sollen doesn't. Yeah. So, ich kann, du kannst, er, sie, es kann, wir können, ihr könnt, etc. Ich kann nicht schwimmen, and so the important thing to note here is the word order. Ich kann nicht schwimmen, so the modal verb goes in the second position, the normal verb position, and then you're going to use it in combination with an infinitive, and that infinitive is going to go to the end of the clause. So it's like, I cannot swim, ich kann nicht schwimmen. Kannst du gut Gitarre spielen? Can you play guitar well? Can you well guitar play? Wir können zusammen fahren. We can ride together. We can together ride. So the other verb, the infinitive verb, needs to go to the end. Könnte auch mitkommen, etc. So, and then every once in a while, these modal verbs, they imply the other verb. If the other verb is implied, then it can be omitted if it's sort of understood. Claire kann gut Deutsch sprechen. So she can speak German well, or she can good German. Sometimes it's left off if it's implied in these very common phrases, right? Kannst du gut Deutsch would be, can you speak German well, but the speak isn't there anymore, it's just implied. Kannst du gut Deutsch? Kannst du gut Englisch? Kannst du gut Spanisch? Ja, ich kann gut Deutsch. Nein, ich kann nicht gut Deutsch, whatever it is. Yeah. Müssen, it's a müssen with the umlaut in the infinitive, but then ich muss, du musst, etc. So, ich muss meine Hausaufgaben machen. I have to do my homework. I must do my homework either way. And then musst du morgen arbeiten, etc. All of these, you see all those, the verbs at the end are the infinitive verbs that are at the end of the clause, because that's just how it works with modal verbs. Sollen is the only one that doesn't take any vowel changes. It's just regular conjugation. And then ich soll is different from a regular present tense though, because it doesn't have these endings. It has no endings. Ich soll, yeah. So it's still slightly irregular. Ich soll meine Hausaufgaben machen. Sollst du morgen arbeiten? So you can either translate it as I should or supposed to, depending on context. Wir sollen das Auto waschen. Mein Bruder soll am Freitag babysitten, etc. Wollen is a pretty tricky one. It means to want to. The reason it's tricky is because this vowel change, ich will, it looks like I will, it looks like it's going to be future tense, but it really is present tense, I want to. So, du willst. Meine Schwester will nach Italien fliegen means my sister wants to fly to Italy. So, especially a lot of times when we talk about wanting things, we want things in the future. So, when you say she wants to fly to Italy, like that would happen in the future. And so it's very tempting to say she will fly to Italy, but it really means want to. Yeah. Willst du morgen? Here's the thing. Do you want to go to Disneyland tomorrow? And so you say tomorrow, and then you think like, oh, well, that's a future, right? But it's not a future. It's just wanting to right now. Wir wollen Eis zum Frühstück essen, etc. Okay, so möchten means would like to. And of course, this is in the conjunctive, the subjunctive, which is in the very last chapter of the book, which we went over at the end. And now you understand möchte a little better. But it's considered one of the modal verbs, even though it's in the subjunctive, because it's commonly you have it's in the second position plus the infinitive at the end. Ich möchte einen Apfel essen, etc. There's möchten. Möchten is a more polite form of wollen, so wir wollen eine Banane essen. It's like not particularly polite, it's very straightforward. And then wir möchten eine Banane essen. It's much more polite, yes. Dürfen, to be allowed to. Ich darf, du darfst, etc. All those vowel changes. Mögen, so this is different. It's used mostly with without a main verb. So you can say ich mag Kuchen, ich mag dieses Buch. Magst du David Hasselhoff, etc. Mag, yeah. And then mögen, there's just two ways to talk about liking things. So ich mag Bier means I like beer, but then ich trinke gern Bier means I like to drink beer. Ich mag Michael, I like Michael. Ich tanze gern mit Michael, I like to dance with Michael. So ich mag Österreich, I like Austria. Ich reise gern nach Österreich, I like to travel to Austria. So if you want to say you like a verb, use gern in combination with that verb. But if you want to say you like a noun, then you use mögen conjugated with that noun. Okay, and then we're going to look at the simple past of the modal verbs. Of course, those have different conjugations. So ich muss in the present tense would be ich musste in the simple past. So you may recognize that te ending from our regular simple past verbs, right? Ich muss in the present tense, ich musste. Ich will in the present tense is ich wollte. And then ich darf in the present tense is ich durfte. I was allowed to, ich durfte. And then ich will in the present tense is ich wollte in the simple past. I wanted to, ich wollte. Der Film soll is supposed to versus was supposed to, sollte. And then mag from mögen in the simple past, it's mochte. So ich mag den Film sehr, I like the film a lot. Ich mochte den Film sehr, I liked the film a lot. So all those have kind of, the sollte and wollte are quite regular looking, but then the other ones have vowel changes and things. So it's important to be able to recognize the simple past of the modal verbs. And here's a chart for you so you can refamiliarize yourself with the simple past of all of these modal verbs. The most common pattern is that they're going to lose their umlaut and they're going to take that te kind of ending. So let's try. Ich musste, du musstest, er, sie, es musste, wir mussten, ihr musstet, sie mussten, sie mussten. You just lose the umlaut and then you get all those endings. Ich konnte, du konntest, er, sie, es konnte, wir konnten, ihr konntet, sie konnten, sie konnten. So it's important to, the umlaut disappearing will be your clue that we're now in the past, not the present. Sollen, ich sollte, du solltest, er, sie, es sollte, wir sollten, ihr solltet, sie sollten, sie sollten. They didn't have an umlaut to begin with, so you can't lose it, but it does get these endings. Ich wollte, it's going to be the exact same as sollen, wollen. It's the exact same except for the first letter is different, right? Ich wollte, du wolltest, er, sie, es wollte, wir wollten, ihr wolltet, sie wollten, sie wollten. I wanted to, you wanted to, etc. Okay, so now the modals can actually be done in the perfect as well. We were doing the simple past just now, but it can be done in the perfect. It's not as common, but it is important to recognize you can do them in the perfect. And normally the perfect is formed with haben or sein plus the past participle. But if you have a modal verb, it's a different construction. Instead of haben or sein plus the past participle, it's going to be haben or sein plus the double infinitive. One of the infinitives will be your main verb, the one that would have been the past participle, and then the other one's going to be the modal verb. So, for example, die Studenten haben viele neue Formen lernen müssen. So you have haben or sein like you normally would with the perfect, but then instead of getting a past participle, you're getting a double infinitive. One of them is the verb that would have been the past participle, and the other one is the modal verb, double infinitive. And of course, that's actually the same. Die Studenten werden noch mehr Formen lernen müssen. When you use a modal verb with the future, it's the same construction, but just werden plus the double infinitive. Yeah. Okay, so the conjugated verb in the perfect tense is haben, and the future tense is werden. Yeah. So you can do, this is just showing how to do the perfect with a modal verb and the future with a modal verb. They're both going to end up with that double infinitive at the end. Er hat viel lernen müssen. So you've got, haben like you normally would, but then instead of just the past participle, you want to use this modal verb as well. So you're going to use the main verb. This one would have been a past participle, but now it's an infinitive, so double infinitive instead. So the perfect with a modal verb is quite rare. People usually prefer the simple past version. Er musste viel lernen. They mean the same thing. He had to study a lot. He had to study a lot. Er hat viel lernen müssen. Er musste viel lernen. Means the same thing. And then, so the perfect with a modal verb, er hat viel lernen müssen. Same thing. The simple past, er musste viel lernen. It means the same. So the perfect version is hat plus the infinitive of the main verb, and then the modal verb infinitive. The simple past version is modal in the simple past, and then infinitive at the end. So you can see how those each work. So you can have the perfect with a modal verb, this is a similar thing. Die Partei hat keinen Kandidaten empfehlen wollen. The party did not want to recommend a candidate, this one. And then the same meaning, you could also do the simple past with a modal verb. Die Partei wollte keinen Kandidaten empfehlen. Yeah. So there's the constructions again. Okay, so we have present participles and past participles as adjectives and adverbs. We also used to learn them. We also learned to use them this way. So der sterbende Wald. You can use the present participle. You just take that infinitive and then you add a D to it. So sterben, that's the infinitive. And then you add the D. That's how you make a present participle. Sterbend. Fließen, fließend. Entscheiden, entscheidend. You add a D to the end of an infinitive. That makes it a present participle. And then you also add an adjective ending. Whatever adjective ending you would normally need you add to the end of that because it's now it can be used as an adjective. So, eine alleinstehende Mutter, das antwortende Kind, etc. So, yeah, those can be used as adjectives. And then we have past participles can also be used as adjectives. Das bedrohte Tier. Bedroht is a past participle. So bedroht itself is the past participle, and then the E is just an adjective ending, etc. And then they can be adverbs as well. When they're adverbs, they're not going to have adjective endings because they're not adjectives, they're adverbs. So überraschend, surprisingly, yeah. Okay. So, and then we have participles and infinitives used as nouns. So this, for example, das Berichtete hat alles bestätigt, the reported, that which was reported, right? Berichtet means reported. So you just capitalize it, and then it becomes neuter, like a neuter noun. And then because it's being used kind of, it's, past participles can be used as adjectives. Now it's a noun, but it's still going to have an adjective ending here. So we have a bunch of examples of those. Hopefully these seem familiar still. Die Schlafende, der Sterbende, yeah, der Gestorbene. And then we can use infinitives as nouns as well. So all you have to do is take the infinitive and then capitalize it, and it becomes neuter. Das Denken, the thinking. Das Singen, the singing. Das Rauchen, the smoking. Das Trinken, the drinking. Yeah. Okay, so now let's do the future tense. We'll do some verbs in the future tense. So we have the construction is with werden plus the infinitive. For example, ich werde meinen Traumjob haben. I will have my dream job. Bernie Sanders wird Präsident sein. Bernie Sanders will be president. Wir werden den Klimawandel verhindern. We will prevent climate change. So when you translate, of course, you have to take that other verb that's at the end and move it back towards, put it with will, right? So werden, of course, we have to remember how to conjugate that because it's ich werde, wird, wir werden, all that, right? So ich werde, du wirst, sie, es wird, wir werden, ihr werdet, sie werden, sie werden. Yeah. But contrast this with wollen. Ich will, wollen means to want to. Ich will means I want to. So it looks like I will, but it's really I want to. It's trying to trick you. Yeah. Ich werde means I will. Ich will means I want to. Du willst, sie, es will. Wir wollen, ihr wollt, sie wollen, sie wollen. So, werden versus wollen. Ich will nach Hause gehen means I want to go home. Ich werde nach Hause gehen means I will go home. The present tense of want, and then the future, ich werde. Yeah. Wir wollen in die Schweiz fahren. We want to drive to Switzerland. Wir werden in die Schweiz fahren. We will drive to Switzerland. Okay, so ich werde, du wirst, sie, es wird, wir werden, ihr werdet, sie werden, sie werden. Versus ich will, du willst, sie, es will, wir wollen, ihr wollt, sie wollen, sie wollen. Yeah, but of course we have to remember that werden, when it's by itself, on its own, as a main verb, it means to become. So, ich werde Ärztin, I am becoming a doctor, I become a doctor. But in werden plus infinitive at the end of the clause means future. Ich werde nach Hause gehen, I will go home. So very different usage there. Ich werde Ärztin werden, but of course you can use them together. If you want to say you will become something, ich werde Ärztin werden. So this first werde means future, and the second werden means become. Okay, so of course you can use modals in the future as well, and then it's going to be that same double infinitive construction that we saw with just a few minutes ago with the perfect double infinitive and also the future double infinitive. Okay, so unsere Freunde werden uns bei der Arbeit helfen können. So werden, we're normally going to do werden plus an infinitive to do the future, right? But then with a modal verb, we suddenly have two other verbs to deal with. So it's just werden plus the two other verbs. And they're both going to be infinitives, and the modal verb is last, and then the other verb second to last. Okay, Then we have the passive. The passive is maybe the trickiest of all the verb types. Maybe the conjunctive is is also tricky. Okay, so we have the passive. It's a voice, not a tense. The reason it's a voice is because it can occur in many different tenses. So it's the opposite of the active voice. The passive places the emphasis on the recipient of the verb's action rather than on the agent of the verb, and it can occur in many different verb tenses. So, for example, sie sieht mich, that's passive, or that's active, versus passive, ich werde gesehen. It's just a different way of looking at the situation. Different perspective, you could say. So, the direct object in the active sentence becomes the subject in the passive sentence. Even though it has become the subject, it is still the recipient of the verb's action. So when you say ich werde gesehen, technically ich is the subject, right? But ich is not doing the action. Ich is receiving the action. So normally we would say, how do you identify the subject of sentence? Well, the subject of the sentence does the action of the verb. The subject is the agent. The subject is the doer. But the passive changes everything. It flips everything around so that that rule doesn't apply anymore. The subject is now the recipient of the action instead of the doer of the action. So, sie sieht mich, she sees me. That's an active sentence because it's from that perspective, right? The subject is doing the action. But ich werde gesehen, now the subject is receiving the action. It's a totally different point of view. So, notice how in this example, the agent has disappeared. Ich werde gesehen, I am seen. Who does the seeing? Well, it's not ich anymore. And in this one, we have no idea who does the seeing, right? So it's common in a passive sentence where you don't even say who does the action. It doesn't matter anymore. But you can still put that information in if you like, and that would be with von plus dative. Ich werde von ihr gesehen, I am seen by her. You could say. Ich werde von ihr gesehen, I am seen by her. Von plus dative is used when the agent is a person. And then, of course, durch plus accusative can be used when the agent is an inanimate object or a cause. Berlin wird durch eine Mauer geteilt. Yeah. And then mit can also be used with a tool type situation. Die Tür wird mit einem Schlüssel geöffnet. Mit einem Schlüssel, very much like with a key in English. Yeah. So then when the emphasis is placed on the indirect object, then the dative case is maintained while the verb still gets put into the passive. So this is different than the other. See how this one is the direct object? It's the accusative, mich, and then it changes to ich. So this accusative thing turns into a nominative thing, right? But on the other hand, this is a different situation. When we want to have an indirect object, a dative thing that goes to the front and has the emphasis now, that's going to work differently. So it's going to remain in the dative. Man gibt mir Geld, which means someone gives me money, versus mir wird Geld gegeben. It's like you don't change it to ich. When it used to be accusative and now it's nominative, like it changes. But in the version where it's the indirect object, the dative, it stays in the dative here. Mir, it's still mir. But see how this verb has changed. Gibt, it's active, but now we're going to change it to the passive with werden plus past participle. Okay, to me is giving money. Yeah. Okay, so when the verb takes a dative object, all of these verbs, when we learn the dative, we learn that helfen, danken, schmecken, gefallen, gehören. They're these weird verbs that just take a dative object. And when we're using those, you can use them with the passive, it's just that you're going to keep that dative happening there. So, mir wird geholfen, I am helped. It's like to me is provided help. Okay, so the passive is formed with a conjugated werden in your desired tense, present, past, whatever. And then the past participle at the end of the clause. Ich werde gesehen, I am seen. Ich wurde gesehen. I was seen. Ich bin gesehen worden. That's the perfect. It's the strangest one. Worden, right? Ich werde gesehen werden. I will be seen. One of the werdens is for the future. This one is for the future, and this one is for the passive. Yeah. Ich kann gesehen werden. That's a passive with modal verb. And then simple past with modal. Ich konnte gesehen werden. So you see we've added werden to all of these. We've got a werden in some form and past participle in some form. But we're going to conjugate the verbs however they need to be conjugated in the tense that they're in. So the perfect has a few irregularities. Ich bin gesehen worden is I was seen or I have been seen. And so it's just, normally you would need geworden, right? But it's just worden. And then sehen would normally use haben as its auxiliary in the perfect. Ich habe gesehen. But in the passive, the operative verb is now werden, not sehen. So werden takes sein. Ich bin 21 geworden. Yeah. Ich bin 21 geworden. I have become 21. Okay. So werden in the active and passive. So ich bin 21 geworden. I have become 21. And the sentence above is active, right? So it's ich bin geworden is how you say I became, right? But then if you want to do the passive, you have to say ich bin gesehen geworden. Ich bin gesehen worden, right? Normally it would be geworden. That's the past participle. But in the passive, worden is just a weird word that you only use for the passive perfect. Yeah. Ich bin gesehen worden, I have been seen. If it were regular, it would be ich bin gesehen geworden. Because the perfect requires a past participle, and the passive also requires a past participle, right? And so we do get that gesehen, that's there, but we get the worden instead of geworden. That's just the weird thing about the passive perfect, yeah. Okay, die Fenster werden jeden Morgen geputzt. So we have conjugated werden plus past participle. That's how you make the passive. It's present tense. The windows are cleaned every morning. So you want to translate that as a present tense passive, are cleaned. Die Fenster wurden jeden Morgen geputzt. Contrast that to, we've just changed werden to the simple past, right? It's conjugated in the simple past now. So we're just going to change that translation to were cleaned instead of are cleaned. So you'll need to know, you'll have to be able to recognize the way that werden is conjugated, and that will tell you what verb tense we're in. Yeah. So we have die Arbeiter werden sehr wenig bezahlt. So this is present tense. Werden, present tense. So the workers are paid very little. Versus the simple past. Die Arbeiter wurden sehr wenig bezahlt. Simple past, wurden. So that's why you know how to say how to do the translation. The workers were paid very little. Okay, so now we're just going to do all of them to compare them. Die Arbeiter werden sehr wenig bezahlt, are paid in the present tense. Die Arbeiter wurden sehr wenig bezahlt, were paid in the past tense, simple past. Die Arbeiter sind sehr wenig bezahlt worden. Whenever you see the word worden, you know this is going to be a passive perfect situation. And then you can say were paid or have been paid. And then future would be werden, sehr wenig bezahlt werden. They will be paid very little. So one of the werdens is for the will and the other one is for the passive. Present with a modal verb. Die Arbeiter können sehr wenig bezahlt werden, can be paid very little. And then simple past with a modal, we just take that instead of können, it's konnten. That's all that's changed. So the workers could be paid very little or were able to be paid very little. Yeah. Okay, so then of course we had some ways that you can use the passive in German that you cannot in English. So this is the normal way, right? But then what if we had the active, wir laufen zum Markt, es wird zum Markt gelaufen. It is walked to the market. It's very strange, yeah. So you just have to say like someone walks to the market or something like that. So you could say, man tanzt, es wird getanzt, it is danced, like people are dancing. Or hier wird getanzt is another good one. Here is danced. Yeah. Here is dance. What is that? Dancing is done here. There is dancing here. You can say things like that. Hier wird geraucht. Here is smoked. That's not very good English. What about smoking is done here? Or there's smoking here. People are smoking here. You could also just change it into the active. People are smoking. Yeah. Hier wird geraucht. Yeah. Okay, so reflexive verbs. And then we have reflexive verbs are very interesting verbs that have special reflexive pronouns that go along with them. So this is a chart to help you remember the pronouns. In the last review of the nouns and pronouns, we looked at all of those pronouns again. Here we have them in nominative, accusative, and dative. Those are all regular pronouns. And I put them next to the reflexive pronouns so you can compare them. I have just the accusative reflexive pronouns here. There are dative ones as well, but just for now, let's look at the accusative ones. So, of course, sich, 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 sich. Those are going to be your characteristic reflexive pronouns. Er, sie, and es, they get sich. And then sie and sie, they get sich. But then the other ones match. Mich, dich, uns, euch. These mich, dich, uns, euch, they match their regular pronouns. Okay, so sich waschen, to wash oneself. Sich duschen, to shower oneself. Sich abtrocknen, to dry oneself off. We got a separable prefix and we got a reflexive. Sich beeilen, to hurry, inseparable prefix and reflexive. Sich konzentrieren, sich fühlen, sich entscheiden, inseparable prefix as well. Okay, so when you conjugate, of course, you've got to conjugate like normal, and then also you're going to change that reflexive pronoun to match the subject, right? Ich rasiere mich. I shave myself. So the reflexive pronoun is going to match the subject. That's the whole point of reflexive verbs, is that they refer self-reflexively to the subject. If the pronoun didn't refer to the subject, then it wouldn't be reflexive. It would just be a regular direct object, right? So, du rasierst dich, rasiert sich, wir rasieren uns, ihr rasiert euch, y'all shave yourselves, sie rasieren sich, you shave yourself. And then you can say sich schminken, ich schminke mich, I put makeup on myself, right? All those. So you've got to, of course, conjugate however you would normally conjugate. It couldn't be in any verb tense, but you have to also change that reflexive pronoun to match the subject. Ich wasche mich. I wash myself. Du wäschst dich. So this one has a stem vowel change, so I've got to make sure to do that. Plus change, use the right reflexive pronoun to match. Du, dich. Wäscht sich, same thing. Okay, so let's look at the perfect. How do we do that in the past? Ich habe mich rasiert. I shaved myself. Du hast dich rasiert. All the same rules apply. You just want to conjugate how you normally would, and then put that. The reflexive pronoun is going to just come after the verb, or after the subject if you have the subject after the verb. So we have sich schminken in the simple past, in the perfect conversational past. Ich habe mich geschminkt. I put makeup on myself, etc. Ich habe mich gewaschen. I washed myself. We've got an irregular past participle here as well. Ich habe mich gewaschen. I washed myself. I have washed myself. So, then let's look at the word order. Ich wasche mich jeden Morgen. I wash myself every morning. Those are all normal word order. You have, if you're going to start with the subject, then the verb, and then the reflexive pronoun comes after that. And then when you have a modal verb is in the second position as usual, and the infinitive at the end, and then the reflexive pronoun follows the verb, as you might expect. Ich muss mich jeden Morgen duschen. I must myself every morning shower. I must shower myself every morning, etc. And then if the separable prefix is there, of course, you're going to remove it and put it to the end, like you normally would. And then your reflexive pronoun just comes after the verb, as you might expect. Ich ziehe mich an. I get dressed. Du trocknest dich ab. You dry yourself off. Separable prefixes. Wir ziehen uns schnell We'll change our clothes very quickly. Okay, when we're not going to start with the subject, then the reflexive pronoun comes after the subject because we already had the verb. So, for example, morgen dusche ich mich 7 Uhr. Morgen is adverb, position 1. And then dusche is our verb. And then because we haven't done our subject yet, we have to do it. We can't put it off any longer. And then we're not going to put off the reflexive pronoun any longer after that. So you end up with the subject and the reflexive pronoun right next to each other. Wann trocknest du dich ab? When are you drying yourself off, etc. Okay, so here's ich rasiere mich. We got a subject, we got a verb, we got a reflexive pronoun. It's in the accusative reflexive pronoun. What about ich rasiere mir die Beine? We have a subject and a verb. Now we have another direct object and a reflexive pronoun. When that happens, our reflexive pronoun is going to be in the dative, not in the accusative. Yeah. So this happens because you add another direct object into the sentence, and so that reflexive pronoun gets demoted into the dative. Okay, so hopefully these are relatively familiar to you still. And then, of course, here are all of your pronouns written out so you can refresh your memory on what all the pronouns are. We've got all the regular pronouns and then all the reflexive pronouns. And you can see the change, the major change is Mia and Dia. They actually match their dative forms in the regular pronouns, but they've changed from the accusative. But then sich is also found in the dative reflexive pronouns. Okay, so then we have some more examples of all these. Sometimes it's mich and sometimes it's Mia, depending on whether it's dative or accusative. And so hopefully these all seem more or less familiar. It was quite a while ago. So here are the charts again, and then here are some more examples of reflexive verbs. And so the thing is, there are some verbs in German that are just always reflexive that aren't in English. So it's like sich erkälten is to catch a cold, but you don't translate it as to catch yourself a cold. I guess it wouldn't sound that bad, but still it's just to catch a cold. You know, you don't have to put, the translation doesn't have the word self in it. It doesn't have to always have self in it. Sometimes it does, but a lot of times you just leave it off. In German, it does have sich, but in English, it often doesn't actually have the word self in the translation. So here, a lot of times it would sound really weird if you put in self, right? So if you have sich ärgern, to get angry or to be annoyed at, it's like to anger yourself at something, right? And then sich erinnern, to remember, to recall. Yeah. So sometimes you can't put the self in there because it's just not what the verb means in English. Yeah. Okay. So, and then sometimes the reflexive is used as to mean something similar to the passive. So you have das Problem löst sich ohne große Anstrengung. The problem is being solved. You could translate it as is being solved because it's sort of saying the problem solves itself, or the problem is being solved. Similar idea. Okay, so now we have these verb first constructions, and these are times when the verb comes first. So the simplest time when you can have the verb coming first in a sentence is with a yes or no question. The reason these are notable, the reason there's a whole category called verb first construction is because normally our verb is in the second position in a main clause and the end in a dependent clause. So that's why this is why we even talk about verb first construction, because normally it's second position. So yes or no questions have their verb first, just like in English a lot of times. Ist das ein Haus? Is that a house? We've got our verb first, is. Ist das ein Haus? Verb first. Scheint die Sonne heute? Shines the sun today? We might say, is the sun shining? But even if you say, is the sun shining, it's still got a verb first. Yeah. Kommst du zur Party? Do you come to the party? Are you coming to the party? Coming to the party. Verb first. Kommst du zur Party? Hast du das Buch? Have you the book? Do you have the book? Verb first. And of course, in English, we used to do this much more parallel to the way it's done in German today. Goes the king hence today. Yeah. Okay, so those were yes or no questions. Now we have a different situation in which the verb comes first, and these are these verb first conditionals. So we have this common children's song. Mein Hut, der hat drei Ecken. Drei Ecken hat mein Hut. Hat nicht drei Ecken, dann ist es nicht mein Hut. So that hat in the first position there, verb first, hat, actually implies the word if. So my hat, it has three corners. Three corners has my hat. If it does not have three corners, then it's not my hat. So the thing is, hat just means has, right? But because it's first like this, it implies the word if. So it's a pretty tricky situation But we do it in English sometimes. If you say, should you arrive early, please wait here, right? The word if isn't there, but it's sort of implied. It means if you arrive early. Should you arrive early? If you arrive early. And that would be, sollten Sie früher ankommen. Bitte warten Sie hier. Had I known that this would happen is sort of like saying, if I had known. Hätte ich gewusst. Yeah. Had I eaten the eggs? These are all, they imply if, right? Hätte ich die Eier gegessen? Okay, so we can see some parallel constructions. Wenn Karl liest, schläft ein. You can use the wenn, and then it's very clear it means if, right? But you can express that same thing by putting the verb first. Liest Karl, schläft ein, and then optionally, and it's probably more common to actually have the so in there. So verb first plus so at the beginning of the next clause implies the word if. So this is pretty common in academic writing. So when you see that verb first coming in at the beginning of a statement, you will need to know, and especially if you see that so at the beginning of the second clause, then the right translation has the word if in it, which is pretty tricky. Wenn sein Sohn etwas erreicht hat, ist jeder Vater glücklich. So wenn means if, so that's very obvious, right? That's not going to trip you out too much. But if you just put that verb first, hat sein Sohn etwas erreicht, then it's going to mean if. You have to know that the if is secretly in there. It's a secret if. Yeah. So the so, the verb at the front, and then the so at the beginning of the next clause will be the indicator, and the so is almost always there. Yeah. So omission of when in conditional clauses, you can review this if you feel that you need more review with that implied if. Okay. The imperative also uses the verb first, similar to English. Gib mir bitte den Stift. Give me the pen. So these are similar to English, so hopefully they aren't too tricky. Kommen, yeah, komm, tanz, fahr, lauf, trag. These are all the forms. So you can see the pattern for the dual form. And then if the stem ends in a D or a T, then of course you see an E on there sometimes. And there can be the vowel changes as well. So that's why it's important to remember these vowel changes. And then sometimes when the vowel change involves an A, then they don't get it. And then so here are all the forms. Hopefully they are more, hopefully you haven't forgotten them completely. The imperative isn't used that much in academic writing, so it's not that important. And hopefully you recognize that they are used similarly to English, right? So here's all these forms. And then the sein is irregular. Yeah. And then if you're going to have a separable prefix, then it will get removed in the imperative. So räum das Zimmer auf would be clean the room up, right? Lade Freunde ein, invite friends. Geh heute Abend aus, go out tonight. Hol deine Mutter ab, pick your mom up. Ruf deinen Vater an, call your dad. Yeah. So just practice all of the forms. Oh yeah, so if you have mitkommen becomes komm mit or kommen Sie mit, right? Yeah. So if you have a separable prefix, it gets taken off when you make an imperative form. Geh aus, geh weg, fahr ab, fahr weg, fahren Sie weg. Yeah. Okay, so those are the imperatives. And then the zu plus infinitive phrases is one of the new ways we learn to use infinitives, right? So infinitive phrases are constructed zu plus infinitive, and it's just a certain construction that verbs show up in sometimes. So you have, for example, ich habe versprochen, Tim zum Flughafen zu fahren, which would be, I promised to drive Tim to the airport. So when you translate, it looks like I promised Tim to the airport to drive. So when you translate it, you need to grab that zu fahren at the end and put it and bring it back forward so that it's I promised to drive, right? Yeah. So the zu infinitive stands at the end of the sentence, the end of the clause. So when you translate it, you need to move it back forward again. So, hast du Lust zu schlafen? Are you in the mood to sleep? Do you feel like sleeping? Do you want to sleep? Hast du Zeit, mich zu besuchen? Do you have time to visit me? Do you the most parallel, the most literal translation, not a very good translation, but just to show you how it is actually constructed is, do you have time, comma, me to visit? Which is, do you have time to visit me? Yeah. And then, of course, sometimes it doesn't have a comma if it's just the little thing. Yeah. Hast du Lust zu schlafen? Hast du Zeit, mich zu besuchen? So this is, of course, often confused with the modal verb construction because modal verbs are used as like the modal verb plus the infinitive, right? So here we have modal verb plus infinitive on the left, but then on the right you see the zu infinitive construction. It's combined with other verbs, not modal verbs, but all sorts of other verbs and all sorts of other little phrases that you want to add the infinitive to. And then if there's a separable prefix, instead of putting the zu before the whole verb, you insert it after the prefix. Hast du wirklich vor, bald umzuziehen? Are you really planning to move soon? And then sometimes you got a double infinitive. You can put the zu after or before the last one. Hast du Zeit, dieses Wochenende mit uns campen zu gehen? Yeah. Okay. And then, of course, these infinitive phrases show up with other verbs that mean all sorts of different things. So you can, be creative in your translations, and sometimes you end up with the ing. Do you feel like baking a cake? Hast du Lust, einen Kuchen zu backen? Or are you in the mood to bake? That's hast du Lust means lots of different things. Yeah. Any way you would like to interpret it. And then zu is another version of this. It's like the next level. Zu, so it means in order to, and it's used in a similar way, except for it implies like purpose. So instead of just like, do you have time to do this? Do you feel like doing this? Or what else? Are you planning to do this? Are you trying to do this? All those little phrases. The zu is then used for in order to, like the purpose of this action is in order to do something else. So it's the same thing. The construction is the same, except for the comes at the beginning of the phrase, and then the rest, the zu plus infinitive at the end, as you would expect. And so it's used when you want to say in order to instead of just to. And then ohne zu is a similar construction, except for it means without doing something. And the ohne comes at the beginning of the phrase, and then the zu at the end of the clause. And then anstatt zu would be instead of doing something. So the parallel constructions. Okay, some verbs have prepositions that go along with them, right? So just like in English, you say concentrate on. You don't say concentrate in, or concentrate of, or concentrate under. You say concentrate on. So in German, it's konzentrieren Sie sich auf. Auf. So it's like sich konzentrieren auf. That's just the preposition that goes with that verb. So sich konzentrieren auf, and then it takes the accusative after. So that's like the whole phrase. It all goes together. So, for example, ich warte auf den Bus. I'm waiting for the bus. So you don't wait under or you don't wait of, you wait for. So it's warten auf plus accusative in German. Yeah. Ich freue mich auf die Reise. I'm looking forward to the trip. That would be sich freuen auf plus accusative. Ich freue mich über die guten Nachrichten. I'm happy about the good news. Sich freuen über plus accusative. So sometimes when you see a verb and a preposition being used together, it's useful to look it up in the dictionary. Look up the verb itself, and then within the entry, you look up the whole long entry, and in there you're going to find that preposition being used in conjunction with the verb somewhere, and that will tell you it might be a different meaning. The way that the preposition is used with the verb might change the meaning of the verb, and it might change the way you translate it. Ich denke an einen Film von Werner Herzog. I'm thinking of a film by Werner Herzog. Comes from denken plus an plus accusative. Ich erinnere mich an die guten alten Zeiten. So sich erinnern an means to remember. And then it technically, erinnern means to remind, so it's like I remind myself of, kind of, but it really means remember. Gretchen fragt Faust, ob an Gott glaubt. Glauben an plus accusative means to believe in. Yeah. Ich muss mich auf die Prüfung vorbereiten. Sich vorbereiten auf. This is a separable prefix verb, so I put the hyphen there, but it's not. It's just a fake hyphen. It's not a real hyphen. So sich vorbereiten auf means to prepare oneself for. So they all go together, right? And you would find in the dictionary, you would find this whole phrase to give you the whole meaning, right? Ich bereite mich auf die Prüfung vor. Same thing, I'm preparing myself for the test. And then we have danken für, to thank for. That one actually ends up being similar to English. Ich habe mich für Vanderbilt entschieden. I decided on Vanderbilt, yeah. Wir bitten Ihr Verständnis. We ask for your understanding. Ich frage nach einer Gehaltserhöhung. Fragen plus nach plus dative means I ask for, I'm asking for. Du hast mir von diesem Restaurant erzählt. You told me about this restaurant. You could also say of. You told me of this restaurant. Sometimes there's multiple ones that kind of make sense. Sie hat sich von ihm getrennt. She broke up with him. She separated herself from him. Either way. Yeah. Okay, dieses Hemd passt zu dieser Hose. Passen zu plus dative means they go together, they fit together. Goes with. And then ich arbeite an einen Aufsatz. Working on. Arbeiten an plus accusative. So this happens with a ton of verbs. They just, leiden an is another one, to suffer from. Yeah. Lots of verbs have little prepositions that just go with them. So it's important to familiarize yourself with these and familiarize yourself with them enough to prompt yourself to, when you see them happening in sentences, then you can realize that they're set, and then you can go to the dictionary and make sure that you're getting the right translation for them as a set, not just translating, the verb and the preposition separately, but translating them as a unit because they go together. So there's a bunch of those. And then we had, you can use like ist and war plus zu plus infinitive. It's like a little phrase that can be used for different things. So you can translate it as can be, could be plus past participle. So die Geschichte der Familie Mendelssohn ist aus ihren Briefen und Tagebüchern sehr gut zu verstehen. Can be understood. Ist zu verstehen. Can be understood. So it's just a construction that's used that you need to understand, like how it's made and what it means. So yeah, is to understand, can be understood. And so review these examples if that is at all, has it all become fuzzy. And then some of these have to be determined based on context. Dieses Buch ist bis Montag zu lesen. Should be read by Monday. Is to read by Monday. What is this book? This book is to read by Monday. It's a read by Monday book or something, right? It should be read by Monday. Yeah. Okay, so now we have some Übungen, some exercises. So all of these exercises are going to test how well you have familiarized yourself with all of the verbs. All these different verb tenses with some participles and different verb situations, some future, some passive, reflexive verbs, infinitive phrases. Yeah. So please do those exercises, and then we'll go over those answers together next time I see you on Zoom. And also you can go to the end of this PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is up on Canvas, and you can look up the answers to check your answers as well. So, wir sehen uns dann nächstes Mal auf Zoom, und vielen Dank und tschüss, auf Wiedersehen.